Members, could you take your seats, please? We're just about to start. We're just seeing if we can get a few more agendas copied. Sam will be back in a second. I'll just wait for that. Councillor Garland, do you think you could close the blind behind you? Thank you. Members, we will make a start. So good evening and welcome to this Policy and Resources Committee meeting on the 26th of April 2017. Before we start on the agenda, may I take this opportunity to advise you that if the fire alarm does sound, please remain seated and it will be Mr Bailey who will be sitting here in a very few seconds, to assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. Tonight's proceedings will be webcast by the Council, but if anyone else is intending recording these proceedings, can you please let me know now? And I don't see anybody indicating. Thank you. I ask this question not to stop you, but merely to ensure that members and other members of the public in the room know that this is taking place. We have received apologies from Councillors Bryce, Harper and Powell. Do we have substitute members, please? Councillor Ring for?
Councillor Bryce.
Thank you. Councillor Atkinson?
For Councillor Harper.
Thank you. And for?
For Councillor Powell.
Thank you very much. I have not been advised that there are any urgent items tonight. And notification of visiting members, I don't see any in the room. Do we have any disclosures by members and officers? Right, Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. In relation to item 12, the flood risk alleviation in the Medway confluence, to avoid any perception of conflict with my professional role, I will leave the room whilst that item is being discussed.
Thank you. And Councillor Horton.
With relation to item 12, through my day job, I've been involved in discussions on this with Kent County Council and the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. However, I don't think I'm predetermined on the recommendations in front of us, so I intend to speak and vote when it comes to it.
Are there any disclosures of lobbying? Well, certainly I've been lobbied on 2 or 3 of the items. Maybe we take it as we go. Has anybody else been lobbied on anything? Right. And perhaps we'll take it at the beginning of each item then, if that's all right. Thank you. To consider whether any item should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. We have one Part 2 item and some Part 2 minutes. So is it agreed that they are taken in private? Thank you. So we go to the minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of March 2017. As usual, I'll take them page by page for accuracy. So we've got page 1, page 2, page 3, and page 4. Are they agreed, and can I therefore sign them? Thank you. I believe there are no petitions this evening, is that correct? Thank you. But I do have some members of the public wishing to to ask a question, sorry. So could I ask Mr. Paul Delaney to come up to the microphone first of all, please? That's the one. Mr. Delaney, you have 3 minutes if you press the middle button, and then when you're comfortable, speak into it.
Yeah, my question is, when considering the decrease in council tax support, was the combined effect of the decrease, when coupled with the increase of the council tax bill in this year, considered? And can you explain why more popular ideas in the consultation that you carried out last year were rejected in favour of the least popular ideas?
Thank you, Mr. Delaney. There's an issue here that the legislation surrounding the council tax support scheme requires that the council makes the decision on its scheme by the 31st of January every year, and that's before we actually make our own decision, or indeed before we're notified of the other authorities that we collect for, tell us what their amounts are going to be. So in actual fact, we cannot really take it directly into account when we're actually making the decision on it. Clearly, we have an idea of the way our own tax is going, and we do obviously take that into account, but it is before that's actually settled. That's the first part of your question. The second part is that we actually considered there were 13 options, and 5 of those options were actually adopted, and 3 of the 5 actually did receive the highest level of support through the consultation. So I don't think what you're saying is strictly accurate. I will also say to you, because I think it's really important, that that's the answer I've given you sounds quite, shall I say, public speak, if I put it that way. But I can honestly assure you that the councillors that met to discuss these issues, both before the formal public meeting and at that meeting, really agonised over all of this in great depth, and did make changes which we felt ameliorated its impact as far as it could be impacted upon, to do the best for the people that we consider are very vulnerable at this point in time. So the decisions were not lightly made. They really were not lightly made. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes. I don't know if you saw the background, but I sent in a set of calculations because I think it was Councillor Blackmore in a video from your discussion about it last year. She gave examples of how Medway is at 35%, and but how you could consider a further decrease in the support rate next year. And I showed in that if you take the same rate that council tax has increased this year, with the decreases suggested between 22.5 and 27.5%, how it would be between, for those on the lowest incomes, it would actually then be a 16%, between 16% and I think it was 42% increase in their bills.
I think the question is, are we likely to go the way of Medway directly? But I'll try and give you a fuller answer. We are required to look at this every year. And we do, and we will, and again, each year we'll have to agonise over this. We're trying to do the best we can within diminishing, well, we haven't got any central government money, the deficit we've had to find, to balance out the best we can do to take account of the finances we have, trying to put it as far as we can within the sort of the national framework so that we can harmonise as far as possible but it's not entirely, but as far as possible, with other benefits so that they harmonise together. But our first thought is always, always what it will do to the people that it's going to affect. We have no plans at the moment to actually go as high as Medway. We have none. I cannot tell you that they won't go up. It's unlikely, given the situation we're in at the moment, that they go the other way and improve, but who knows? But the assurance I give you is that every single councillor takes this extremely seriously, and we always do the best we can for the people we know it will affect. I also understand that Mrs. Yolanda Kenwood wishes to ask a question. If you would come forward, please. Thank you. And again, you have 3 minutes for your question if you would like to speak when you're ready. Excuse me, can you put your mic on?
Okay, sorry. My question is, given the volume of new houses that have been built in Maidstone recently, and therefore the additional council tax revenue that this has generated, why was there any need for a council tax increase in Maidstone?
Thank you. As the number of homes in the borough increases, so does the cost of providing services for our residents. So it's not a simple fact that we get additional money and it's just additional money that could go to other things. Many services, such as street cleaning and household refuse collection, are directly related to the number of homes in the borough, and therefore every time we have a new home, there's an additional cost because of the rounds, for example. Other services are more indirectly related to the increase in population, but nevertheless they have an impact. Our parks, for instance, is one. The more heavily they're used, and we want them to be used, clearly, but the more heavily they're used, the more deterioration can occur, and therefore the maintenance costs go up. And so any increase in council tax income is directly linked to increased expenditure. That's the first part of the equation, if you like. In addition to the pressures from additional homes, there were specific reasons for the council decided to increase its council tax. We now no longer receive revenue support grant from government, none. We no longer receive any. And we are now facing increasing spending pressures, for example, in providing temporary accommodation for homeless families. The issue of homelessness has gone up dramatically, and we take that extremely seriously, and it is, if I use the word swallowing, that it is swallowing additional resources to a great extent, and rightly so, because we need to house homeless people. So the Council agreed at its meeting on the 1st of March to put up council tax. However, the increase for 2017-18 is only £4.95 for a Band D property, which is less than 10p a week. Have you an additional question?
Yes, I have an additional question, because obviously I want to do my best for this town and the people in it. And my question is, please, Councillor Wilson, could you contact Maidstone Police and ask them to help the council by pursuing 3 outstanding crime references I have with them that can bring in revenue, significant sums?
I'm very sorry, Mrs. Kenwood, but I can't take that as a supplementary question because it is not directly related either to your first question or to the answer I gave you. If you wish to talk to me at another time, then please do.
Okay. Can I ask a different question then?
No, no, I'm sorry. You've asked the questions that you wish to ask. Thank you. We now turn to page 5, which is agenda item 11. Mr. Green, do you have any comments for us, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Since we went to print with this agenda, we've done more work on the work programme for the coming year, and I'd like to draw members' attention in particular to some further reports that we're going to be bringing to the June meeting of this committee. First of all, we're going to present the Q4 and final figures for the financial year ending 31st of March 2017. We're also going to be presenting proposals for next year's council tax support scheme, and there'll be an update on Maidstone East. So those reports are in addition to the ones that are shown in the papers in front of you.
Members, do you have any questions at all? So that's agreed as it currently stands. Thank you. We move. Councillor Blackmore.
Sorry, Madam Chairman, just one comment. That would take to, I believe, 10 the number of items for June. Have we definitely got an adjourned date for the beginning of July? Because it looks like it might be required.
We can certainly look for one if we haven't got one. I will say, because this is coming to the end of this year, that this committee has been very disciplined, and much to, I will say, to my amazement on certain occasions, we have got right the way through a very heavy agenda. But you're right, we should look for an adjourned date. We move to agenda item 12, which you'll find on page 6 to 15. Councillor Harwood, if you would leave the chamber, please. Right, before we actually take the item specifically, I have two people who wish to make statements to the committee. So, Mr. Rakes from the Medway Belt and Tees Flood Group, if you would come to the table, please. Sorry? Oh, yes, yes. Mr. Rakes, likewise, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, I'd like to congratulate you for commissioning this excellent report by Arcadis. I'd also like to congratulate Mr. Garvey, author of the report, for his brave and sensible attempt to do justice to the 52 assorted options presented to him. My name is Edward Rakes, and I'm speaking for the Medway Belt and Tees Flood Group, based on Yalding and adjacent settlements. On Christmas Day 2013, I had water in my house, as did many other residents of Yalding, Laddingford, Collier Street and Hunton. The reason why we get floods at Yalding is there is more water arriving from the Middle Medway in the west, from the Belt in the east, from the Tees in the south, than can be carried away through a narrow defile in the Greensand Dredge by the Lower Medway to the north. So, it's easy to see there are two main ways of tackling this problem. One is to try, by the use of flood storage areas, wetlands, afforestation, etc., to reduce the rate at which floodwater arrives at Yalding. On the whole, we approve of the way that the report deals with these options. The other is to improve the drainage from Yalding down to the sea. So you can slow down the water coming in, and or you can speed it up going out. I'm sorry to say that as far as improving the downstream drainage is concerned, we find this report unsatisfactory. We think that by clever and coordinated use of the sluices and locks at Allington Lock and of the other sluices up the river, together with digging out earthed-up arches at Teeston and East Farley bridges, and work to improve the flow in the vicinity of specific pinch points, it should be possible to increase the rate of flow from Anchor Sluice at Yalding down to Allington Lock by as much as a third. with corresponding significant reductions of water levels. These are modest measures available at a guess for an affordable cost of something under £1 million. We think that the question of an integrated policy for improving discharge to the sea has never been properly studied. If it is successful, a scheme like this will benefit communities all over the catchment. We urge councillors to commission further work in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Brown, if you would come to the microphone, please. And again, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Members, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Chairman of the Alderton Parish Council, and on Christmas Day 2013, I had 3 foot of water through the entire ground floor of my house. I would just like to talk about the report. Thank you, as Edward says, for commissioning the Arcadis report, but it's Mr Green's report and your recommendations. Just to let you know that Alderton Parish Council has withdrawn from the Joint Parishes Flood Group. We didn't feel it worked for us and we didn't feel it appropriate, and we felt we were losing our identity, which Alderton cannot afford to do. On item 2 of the recommendation on page 1, we'd like that to say, and the Medway Flood Partnership, not through the Medway Flood Partnership, because we believe there can be occasions when we can work on probabilities without necessarily going through that group, although the group is important. At 2.1, we would ask that Alderton Parish Council is added in there and that it is reworded so that the JPFG, it says including those represented by the JPFG. And we also feel that at the end of 2.1, maybe the actual part of the Medway and its tributaries should be designated, i.e. upstream of Alderton to and including the town centre. At 2.7 bullet point 3, Alderton will scream if it hears of walls anymore. We do not want walls around Alderton and they will not work. 2.11, again, Alderton Parish Council to be included because we will become members of the Medway Flood Partnership. 2.15, the number of properties has now increased to in excess of 400, and there is a meeting today, I think it was, with the Environment Agency, with some of the other parishes, so that could increase. So can we take the number out? And could we also take out at 2.15 the up to £7,500 per property, because it has changed once from 5 to 7.5, and what we don't want is we don't want money written down and set in stone that we may be able to influence later. And at 2.17, the £1.5 million that Mr Carter put on the table was specifically for Alderton, although it was understood that Collier Street and what we call the confluence parishes, i.e. Nettlestead and Hunton, would be included. But we now seem to be going out to Headcorn and Staplehurst, and that £1.5 million ain't going to go very far to
Councillor
the
Brown,
parishes.
your time's actually up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown, the report that's on the papers that you've alluded to is a report that we're not here to amend, but I've watched that we have made full notes of what you've said, and I'm sure the councillors will take into account what you've said when they're looking at the actual recommendations, and officers clearly will take on board what you've said for further reports and obviously decide whether they believe they should or should not take on board precisely what you've said. But please be assured it's been well noted. Thank you. Members, I want to ask if anybody has been lobbied on this particular item. I certainly have been. So that's Councillor Round, Councillor McLaughlin, Councillor Blackmore, Councillor Borden, Councillor Firmer, Councillor Cox and myself. I don't see anybody else indicating. Okay. Mr Green, then, can we go to you to introduce the item?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Let me present the highlights of the report. As has already been alluded to, the Council, the Environment Agency, KCC, have worked since the floods back in Christmas 2013 to develop flood alleviation measures. And the background to this report is that the Environment Agency's initial assessment proposed increasing the capacity of the Lye flood storage area on the Medway above Tunbridge, but proposed relatively little for the area around the Medway confluence, the confluence of the Belt, Tees and Medway. So local community were not particularly happy with the direction in which things were going. So we responded to that by commissioning the Arcadis report that has been referred to. And specifically the brief that we gave Arcadis was to, first of all, give an independent view of the Environment Agency's proposals, also to investigate the suggestions put forward by the Joint Parishes Flood Group, as it was then, of which there were 52, as has already been mentioned, and also to come up with any ideas that they had. Arcadis are a reputable organisation with masses of experience in this area, so it was worth hearing from them. And the Arcadis report is very detailed and comprehensive. We haven't attached it as an appendix to the report in the papers because it's 124 pages and is quite technical, but it's been published as part of the background papers to this report. And the findings from the Arcadis report were basically that there wasn't any one single technically feasible or economically viable solution in the Medway confluence area. They looked at the 52 options that we asked them to, and some of them made minor improvements to the situation, but none of them had a significant effect, even taken together. We presented the findings, or specifically Phil Garvey of Arcadis presented the findings to the Joint Parishes Flood Group and to Yalding Parish Council last week. And as has been said already, I think the work was welcomed, although it didn't present a one-size-fits-all solution. I think people appreciated the clarity and the detail of the amount of work that had been done. So the way forward that we have now, and this is actually fairly consistent with what the Environment Agency is proposing, is that Environment Agency will commission surveys of the households that are at risk in the area, and I'm aware too that the number of properties that they'd like to survey has gone up from 326 to over 400. And not all of these properties will be suitable for property level protection, but the Environment Agency has said, well, that's not the case. Then they will look at schemes that will provide protection either for individual properties or for groups of properties. And it's important that as many of the 400 households are actually surveyed as possible, because the more data that the Environment Agency gets, well, first of all, the more properties can be protected, but the more information they will have to help them in designing schemes in the future. So we, as a council, would recommend, or the recommendation here is that members support that initiative and that we continue to work with the Environment Agency and with local stakeholders in developing those solutions. So that's the second of the recommendations in the report. The final one is to do with flood alleviation work in Maidstone Town Centre, where the opportunity has been taken as part of the Bridges Gyratory Road Scheme to protect the area around the lower High Street. And the report also describes another scheme at the Medway Street subway, which we're looking into and which we're hoping to get funding for. So work going on both in the town centre as well as in the Medway confluence area. So basically, members are asked to note the conclusions from the Arcadis report to support us continuing to work with the Environment Agency on the next steps and to note the position in Maidstone Town Centre. Thank you.
Members, yes, Councillor McLaughlin, please.
She did. Thank you, Chair. I too would like to thank the Borough for funding this report from Arcadis. It's a professional report, but it does need more time to digest. It was presented to us only last week. There was limited time for prior knowledge or questions and answers. And as a result, I do want a commitment from the Council that they will allow us to continue a dialogue with Arcadis so that we can continue to investigate some of their answers. We don't entirely agree. Mr. Rakes simplistically said there's two ways of dealing with flooding, holding the water back or getting it out quickly. I think there may be some further investigation, principally economically, with regard to the Tees FSAs. We haven't totally ruled that out yet. But there's certainly some scope, as was alluded to try and improve downflow. And we've heard time and again that no one issue or one solution will produce any significant difference, but a number of solutions may produce some small significant differences collectively. And the EA talk about a 1 in a 75-year event. If you can stop some deflooding in a 1 in 10-year event, I think it's worth doing. If you've been flooded, you'd know about that. The other thing is, if you just bear with me, the modelling work that was undertaken stopped, I think, at East Farley. We had the benefit of using EA's model, which was extremely useful, and I would go on record as thanking the EA for cooperating with that. But there is some work to be done, I think, in further downstream to the Allington Lock, which we'll talk to Arcadis about, given the opportunity. So I would like also the Council to consider investigating a relationship with the Environment Agency that allows us to scrutinise the operation both of the new Lye barrier and indeed the existing one if it comes to it, and also the Allington Lock, to see if there are other ways of managing the flow of water. Whether we ourselves have got the expertise to do that, I doubt, with respect, but I'd like to see a mechanism set up going forward where we can involve ourselves as a council in that activity. My third point, that is my third point. I've said that we want to continue a dialogue with Arcadis. I want further analysis of work done on downstream flow, and lastly, I'd like the council to get involved with scrutinising the operation of the flow of rivers from the FSA at Lye and at Allington Lock. I might think of something else to say later, but I'll stand down at that stage. Thank you.
Mr. Green, do you want to come back and say that can be taken on board, or do I need to ask Councillor McLaughlin to make it a formal?
Maybe take the advice first.
Well, that's when I said or.
Yes, there's one point in particular that I'd like to pick up, because the issue about further work downstream, which you raised, Councillor McLaughlin, and Mr. Rakes also raised. I have explored this with Arcadis, and their view, and I think this was covered in the meeting with Joint Parishes Flood Group last week, is that there isn't actually an awful lot of merit in doing work downstream. And the reason for that, without going too far into the technicalities, is that the floods that you have around Yalding and Collier Street arise partly because there's, or largely because there's a constriction at Wateringbury, and so whatever work you do downstream of Wateringbury doesn't actually solve that basic problem, that there's only a small area that the water can get through there. Now, so far as all the technical background to that's concerned, certainly we can get Arcadis to provide chapter and verse, but their view is that it's not worth exploring the downstream solutions in a lot of detail. And although we've spent some money with Arcadis on this, I agree it may be worth continuing to use them to provide an independent view as we go forward. I'm not sure that this is an avenue that it's worth exploring in a lot of detail.
Want to come back, Councillor McLaughlin?
Well, just quickly, because I think it's something we will want to explore with Arcadis. I mean, the simple answer to a pinch point is to dig it out. But then I'm not a hydrologist, so that's the only point I'm making. We would like to explore that.
Mr. Green?
We can certainly get Arcadis to confirm their position on that.
Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think this is a really difficult subject because quite often when we talk about significant events, we're talking about 1 in 100 years, 1 in 300 years. I think there are probably people in this room who've had floods twice in 13 years. And that's something that I think we can all relate to because it's over such a short period of time. I welcome the contents of the Arcadis report, but I do have a caveat, which is I can support the recommendations in front of us, providing we insert the word proactively. So we continue to work proactively with the Environment Agency, because I think otherwise it's just paying lip service and it doesn't take on board what Mrs Brown and Mr Rakes have said and also what Councillor McLaughlin has said. And I think we also need to include under other organisations, including Yalding Parish Council too. And at that point, I think those recommendations are therefore acceptable and I would support them.
Councillor Blackmore, I just want to query, why specifically to mention Yalding when other organisations is a catchphrase for everybody that should be in there? Have you got specific concerns about that?
Because when you consider that Yalding has suffered so many times, I wouldn't want them to be omitted in any shape or form. So I want to be absolutely certain they will be included.
Are Councillor Blackmore's proposal seconded? Thank you. Councillor McLaughlin has seconded that. I'm going to go on for a minute and move to Councillor Atkinson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. I notice this is a brand new report, but we had another report in March 2016, and before that there was one in May 2008 by Mott MacDonald. Nothing's been achieved in all that time, and yet we've probably spent thousands of pounds on these reports. I mean, does anyone know how much we've spent? And then moving on from there, Para 2.15, I'd like to make sure that those properties include the Hart Street and Clifford Way area, because they suffered devastating flooding as well. And also paragraph 2.11, the Medway Valley Conservation Partnership has surely got some sound views on what needs to be done in this area. So have we ever consulted them? And I think we really should, because they know everything about the Medway Valley. So, yeah, thanks very much.
Okay, Mr Green, would you like to respond to that?
You're right, Councillor Atkinson, in that I'm aware a lot of work has been done on this over the years, but the the most recent report is probably the most in-depth investigation. It's also using the most up-to-date information from the Environment Agency's model of the area. So I think it supersedes previous work, and it does offer a way forward in the way that we've described. On the question about the other properties that you described, they're, as I understand it, outside the area that this was addressing, particularly around the Medway confluence, but I can look into what measures have been considered in relation to those.
I have Councillor Borton next.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think we're at a danger at times of we need to have a blunt discussion about what's going on here. And the Arcadis report is pretty clear, and it's not proposed any radical solutions as far as I can see. And here we are 3.5 years on from the initial floods in Yaldin, and not much has changed, yet we look at other parts of the Medway catchment area, particularly upstream, and they've been able to organise themselves a bit better. So it's, as far as I can see, we could go round and round the houses a bit more and talk about this, but it's about time we got on with some firm action based on the evidence that's put in front of us. Now, looking at the recommendations that we're looking at this evening, so it's all a bit motherhood and apple pie, really. 1 and 3, of course, we note the contents of the report. I mean, that goes without saying, really. And would the Council continue to work with the Environment Agency? Yeah, it would be stupid not to. Other organisations, with or without Yaldin, yeah, obviously, and the local community has passed the Medway Flood Partnership. I see no alternative here. So, really, we've just got to continue with the work led by the Environment Agency, involve ourselves and cooperate fully with our neighbours and all these other organisations, and really get on to achieve what best we can. I personally don't feel that that additional work, when our existing work has said the same thing time after time, is necessarily the best way forward or will change much, because, hey, look, flooding could come along tomorrow, and residents will turn around and say, well, you spent 3.5 years talking about this and there's been no action yet. And that's something that we've got to guard against as a council.
Councillor Borton, I'm going to say something, because I agree we need action, but I think this piece of work was very necessary because we had so many people actually frankly disagreeing with what the EA was saying, that we actually needed to do what we could to bottom that out. And to a great extent, the Arcadis report I believe has done that. I was going to say that one of the things I think we need to look for is a timeline, so that we have some surety. We've got reports coming back, and I hope everybody agrees that we have moved forward this year, because at the beginning of this year we found agencies simply were not working together. So the one thing I think hopefully we have achieved this year is to get everybody to work together, and hopefully to actually bottom out some of the areas where there was huge dissent. Not everybody's on the same page, and I don't suppose they ever will be. But I do believe we've made some progress. I agree with you. I'd like to see it faster. Would you like to come back?
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting it was a waste of time. Far from it. I'm suggesting the outcome of what's been said has been said pretty clearly, to be honest. And we're in a position now where there is no obvious solution, and we're just going to have to move forward within the parameters that we've been set. Those parameters are not as wide as we'd like in an ideal world, but we are where we are, and we're just going to have to get on with it, really. That's in a nutshell, what I think.
Councillor Furman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. First off, thank you to the officers for bringing this report to us today. I think I and a number of other members were frustrated about the time taken, but actually it's very thorough, and I think it was good that we invested that time into doing it properly. I agree with Councillor McLaughlin that I'd like a few more weeks and things to digest what's in the report, and I'm pleased that the recommendations are reasonably open, that we will continue to have that ongoing dialogue. I therefore would support the recommendations, and I am reasonably happy actually to support Councillor Blackmore's addition of the yielding in there, having listened to Councillor Brown's concerns at the start and what Mr Rakes said as well. So, yeah, no, thank you.
Councillor Gooch.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just wanted to clarify something, please, and it's linked to something that my colleague here said. Although Barming Parish Council, for example, is not a member of the Joint Parishes Flood Group, parts of Barming, certainly at Farley Bridge, suffered desperately in the December 16 floods. The Malt House was just subsumed, really. So even though they're not formally part, I'm rather hoping that anything practical and constructive that can come out of these reports can be shared with people who aren't necessarily in the obvious larger groups, so that everybody along the line can benefit. And I wondered if you could just confirm that for me, please.
I'll need to come back to you on whether there are areas in Barming that are within the scope of this. I think it's all areas that are upstream of Wateringbury, but I'll come back to you and confirm.
Councillor Gooch, do you think that would be worth putting as an additional recommendation? The reason I mention it is because I myself have mentioned the sort of the Tovel area, and it seems we've got town centre and we've got upstream. I do not want to detract from the speed at which we work on the other areas, but I do think it's advisable that we remember that there are areas in between that also get flooded.
That's a good point, and I thank you very much for that, Chairman, but I would want to be very sure that it does not detract from the work that needs to be done. That's very, very important. So
what are you saying, yes or no?
Oh, yes, please, I would like it to be included. The Farley Bridge area would be included.
So if you, while we continue with the debate, if we look for perhaps a form of words.
I'll try and put in a form of words somewhere. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor McLaughlin, to come back, and I have got you also, Councillor Barnard.
If I can just come back on what Councillor Gooch said, East Farley are represented on the JPFG and do pay attention to what's going on. I can't immediately advise you who it is, but it's somebody from their parish council.
Yes, that is useful. A moment. Oh, yes. Thank you. That is useful. It's the other side of the river, and I'm not so sure that had as many properties underwater as we did. So, but thank you for the advice.
Okay. What I wanted to say in response to Councillor Borton's comments is that we are going along with the Environment Agency's plan to implement property level resistance, it's now called, PLR. It's gone from property level protection to property level resilience to property level resistance. And I gather from what Councillor Brown said that a meeting has now been held with the parish councils to seek their agreement to the eligible properties for surveys being approached. If the parish councils didn't agree to that, and I don't know the outcome of that meeting, they were going to go ahead anyway, so it was a rather academic process as far as I can see. So that is continuing, and we are supportive of that, I think, as a community. So we do want to see things moving forward, but at the same time, we don't want to give up on other alternatives. Thank you.
Councillor Barnard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If my memory serves me correct, didn't the coalition government or the current Conservative government promise money towards this? I remember reading about it in the paper and there was a big thing on the television about it. Can you tell me what happened about that?
Who would like to answer that one? Mr. Green? Do you want to come back?
The funding that's available at the moment is set out in the report in 217. I can't really speak for what was said in the immediate aftermath of the floods in 2013. I think there were some quite big promises made, but the current position is as set out here. So KCC are promising £1.5 million. We've got £1 million in our capital programme. The Environment Agency are quite constrained in the rules about what they can spend, but within their budgets they can spend this up to £7,500 as it is at the moment per property, and there are other pots of money that they can draw on, but there isn't a kind of a big 20 million pool of funds anywhere that we could use.
So the answer is the government of the day is not giving anything towards this?
They are through the Environment Agency, or rather through the DEFRA funding that the Environment Agency can access.
Councillor Blackmore, if you want to come back, but I was also going to come back to you to ask if you'd read out that amendment so we're sure we proposed amendment. I think it was to continue to work proactively with the Environment Agency, other organisations, Yalding and the local community.
Yes, Madam Chairman, that's correct. But actually, I'd like to make a comment following on from Councillor Barnard's remarks, which relates to monies that were offered following the floods, I believe, in Cumbria last year. And I think that a letter was sent on behalf of the Council, as recommended by myself from this committee, and we received a response to say nothing doing. Having said that, I believe that there is an election at Kent County Council later on this month, so that could represent an opportunity for us to then go back to KCC yet again. And with the general election in June, surely there'll be a little bit of musical chairs going on, so there'll be another opportunity there to make a similar request. And at the end of the day, it's a couple of letters, and if you don't ask, you don't get. So I think I'd like to make that as a further recommendation, if anybody would like to support that.
I think it's safe to say that this committee has followed, it was your suggestion to send that letter, but I think it's fair to say that this committee has followed every opportunity that it's been given and has taken opportunities that weren't even there. So to be honest, Councillor, I don't think we need a recommendation. We just need to be on the ball all the time and actually really be sure we follow through every step of the way. However, it is up to the committee to decide if they wish to take it or not. So you have made it as a recommendation? Yes. And I believe I saw it seconded by Councillor Barnard. First of all, then, we are going to take the amendment to 2, which, Councillor Blackmore, you said the word?
To continue to work proactively with the Environment Agency, other organisations, including Yalding Parish Council and the local community, and then the rest of it can stay.
Is that agreed, members? I want to have a show of hands, please. That is unanimous. That will become this part of the substantive, but I won't take it yet because I'll see if we can take the whole lot in one go. But I won't forget that we have to do that. We then had a recommendation. Councillor Gooch, I think we might have some words here that we can take.
I was afraid you'd say that, Chairman, because I am struggling a bit. Because if indeed it's... you think that I'm getting a nod here.
Shall we see what the wording could be, and then we can say yes or no?
I would love a suggestion. Yes, please.
In an attempt to embrace what you've said, Councillor Gooch, and what Councillor Atkinson said, maybe something along the lines of to give consideration to flood alleviation measures in the area between Yalding and the town centre. And that would respond to Barming, Hart Street and Clifford Way, and Tovel that were specifically mentioned.
Sorry, I think that would work beautifully. Thank you very much indeed.
So are you proposing that, Councillor Gooch?
Yes, I am proposing that, but I didn't write it down.
And do we have a seconder? Councillor Firma's arm went up fractionally before yours, so we'll take Councillor Firma. So we're now going to vote on that. Those in favour of that amendment, please show. Again, that is unanimous. So that is now incorporated as recommendation 4, and we will have to vote on that so that it becomes a substantive. And we're going to now take the third amendment. Councillor Blackmore, do you have wording, please?
I do, Madam Chairman. I may need help from the Chief Executive as to how to word it, as I'm not particularly a very good wordsmith. But I would suggest something along the lines of to lobby Kent County Council and DEFRA following the 2017 elections to seek funds for flood alleviation measures and report back to this committee. But I'm very happy to have any improvements made.
You also suggested Kent County Council earlier on. Did you just say it? Sorry, I didn't. Right.
I had something very similar. That Maidstone Borough Council should write, I think you said lobby, to both Kent County Council and the government post the 27 elections to seek further resources for flood alleviation measures in the borough and report back to this committee. Is that?
Councillor Firma, you want to
may we have resources, may we have funds rather than resources, because they might just offer us some sandbags.
Councillor Firma, you want to...
It was just whether we wanted to be more specific, because we've got, Anthony said government, and then you were DEFRA. It was whether we were thinking MP or DEFRA or government as a whole, or does it matter all three? That was just the question.
I thought government might embrace Treasury and DEFRA.
Yes, Councillor Blackmore.
In that case, could we specify the Treasury and DEFRA? Because I just wonder if national government is a little bit woolly and it might just disappear into the black hole of letters.
Right, so that before Councillor Black, I'm going to ask the Chief Exec to read it out again so that also Mr Bailey is sure he's got it. And so listen very carefully, everybody, please.
I shall say this only once. That Maidstone Borough Council should write to both Kent County Council, actually it's 3 now, to Kent County Council, DEFRA and the Treasury, post the 2017 elections to seek further funding for flood alleviation measures in the borough and report back to this committee. Another one.
Councillor Blackmore.
I'm sorry, I'm going to query the language. I don't like the word should, because it sounds as if there's an element of an option. Could we have the word will, so that it's a little bit more positive, please?
Done, that's done. You've proposed. Is there a seconder, please? Councillor Gooch, your hand went up first. Thank you. Can I then go to the vote on that? Is that accepted as an additional recommendation? Thank you. Again, that is unanimous. Right, so I think I can take it. Members, I'm going to take all the recommendations together. So the 3 that you have voted on now become, it's a substantive vote on those as part of what we already have on the paper. So you've got to note the contents and conclusions of the Arcadis report on the Medway Belt and Tees flood alleviation options. 2 is with an amendment within it to continue to work proactively with the Environment Agency, other organisations, Yalding Parish Council and the local community as part of the Medway Flood Partnership to develop and implement a range of flood alleviation measures in the Medway confluence area. 3, to note the progress of schemes relating to flood alleviation in Maidstone Town Centre. And then you've got 4 and 5 with the wording you have just agreed. Do we need to read 4 and 5 out again? No. Please can we go to the vote then, members, on that collectively? Those in favour? And again, that is unanimous. Thank you very much. Councillor Round, could you do me a favour and tell Councillor Harwood he can now come back in? Thank you. I know, of course he was. So we now go to pages 16 to 37, agenda item 13, which is the report of the Director of Head of Policy and Communications, the key performance indicators. I believe Mrs Woodhouse and Miss Collier, so you're going to be a double act. Who's starting off on this?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So,
shall we just give people a minute to sort themselves out and then... Right. I'm going to ask, although I'll be very surprised, I'm sorry, I'm saying I'm going to be surprised, I shouldn't prejudge. Has anybody been lobbied on this particular item? No. So. Right, would you like to start?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So in December, the committee agreed 3 priority action areas for 2017-18, and that Policy and Resources should receive KPI reports on these areas only. So the areas are providing a clean and safe environment, regenerating the town centre, and a home for everyone. The remaining 5 action areas will have KPIs reported to service committees, and the ones under A Home for Everyone and Clean and Safe will also be reported to Strategic Planning, Sustainability and Transportation Committee and Communities, Housing and Environment Committee as well. Following a workshop, the KPIs have been, the key performance indicator set we had last year has been refined, and a set of key performance indicators 2017-18 has been set out at section 3.3 of the report on page 21. I've just got a couple of things to highlight. So under Clean and Safe, where it actually lists for the Safe and Maidstone Partnership, it lists an update on the Safe and Maidstone Partnerships priorities. There's actually 5 areas under that. So that will cover those 5 areas, and it will be a 6-monthly update on progress made under those 5 areas, and that's provided for contextual information, as we've done in the past. Going on from that, the workshop with members actually identified that more information was needed on how we define our standards in relation to the first 2 indicators on litter and detritus. So the suggestion is that we provide a clear explanation when you get the report, and we provide photographs of the different standards so you can see what we mean. So we'll provide more information when we report it to you, so hopefully it'll be more useful. The other area that's changed, following input from the head service and from councillors, was percentage of fly tips, which has changed to those which result in action, because we had a conversation about the importance of enforcement, as well as just, okay, we went and sorted it, but it's actually enforcing against the people who fly tipped in the first place. And to clarify, the target is 20% of those that have evidential value present, resulting in enforcement action. So it's not 20% of all fly tipping, it's those that have that evidence that we can use to then pursue for prosecution. And the head of service has indicated that's a realistic target. An additional indicator has also been added for number of litter reports attended to. So this is where someone has reported to us there's litter, and it's us attending to that. And again, that, as the head of service has indicated, that's something she holds information on, is happy to report, and believes it will provide a wider picture of what the service is doing. Under regenerating the town centre, previously, we had 1 indicator. The proposal is to add in a yearly snapshot on business rates collected in the town centre and quarterly information on vacant units. So it's to give you a bit more information on that. And then under A Home for Everyone, I have an amendment to the target. So following councillor feedback, I looked into this a bit further. So the net additional homes provided target needs to be raised from 600 to 880, which has been established by the Government Inspector as a realistic average target following inspection local plan. So thanks for the heads up, and apologies, it was low. So we're now proposing 880. Following on from that, I believe the target for affordable homes underneath may also requiring adjusting slightly, probably not majorly, so I'd like to say that as to be confirmed, and once we've done a bit more work, when we bring your first quarterly report, we'll have a target in there that's realistic. And And the other areas, there's 2 new indicators that have been added to this area. So the ones on... So this is on page 21. Under A Home for Everyone, we've got an addition of processing of minor planning applications and processing of other planning applications. They were added in at the request of SPST committee. I might suggest that you don't want that level of detail, but if you do, we're already preparing it, but you may not want it at this committee, but it's on there for information, so you might want to consider that when you're considering which one's going forward. And I'm happy to take questions.
Councillor Harvey, you were first.
Thank you for this report. Could you just please specify exactly which of the 5 things under the Safer Maidstone Partnership? I can only see 3 on the report.
So apologies, that was my error, so that's why I picked up. So the 5 themes are organised crime groups, including modern slavery, gangs and child sexual exploitation, substance misuse, domestic abuse and violent crime, and mental health. No problem.
Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for clarifying the net additional homes figure, because 600 looked horribly low, bearing in mind we're looking at 17,600. And although my maths isn't very good, I think if you divide that by 20, you end up with 880, or roughly there. The number of affordable homes delivered, do I take it that is a subset of the 880 and not in addition to? It's part of. Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Mrs Woodhouse, I think we do have to make that very, very clear in that final iteration of this. I have nobody else at the... Right, thank you. Councillor McLaughlin.
Wouldn't want to disappoint you, Chair. Will somebody please explain the difference between litter and detritus? and secondly, I'm a bit disappointed in the target for recycling. It's the same as the current year, and I just would like to know why we aren't being a bit more ambitious. Thank you.
Okay, so if I take the difference between litter and detritus, so in terms of litter, it's anything dropped, thrown, left or deposits that causes defacement. So in a public place, so that would be your general things that are chucked around like Coke cans, etc., things like that, examples of litter. Detritus, however, is things like dust, mud, soil, grit, gravel, stones, things, rotted leaf and vegetable residues and fragments of twigs, glass, plastic and other finely divided materials. So there is a difference. One is something people drop, and something the rest is things that accumulate. There's more natural vegetation and things.
I would just ask why the percentage targets are therefore different.
Who's going to answer that one? And then we mustn't forget Councillor McLaughlin's other question.
Right. I'd have to go away and get further information for you on those targets, but they have been set with the head of service and they do represent an improvement on the current year's performance. They measure different things, and we're looking for a higher standard on litter than detritus would be my explanation. That might be a bit too obvious, and I'll go away and look into it and get you some more information on the targets. Come on.
I'd be happy with an email if the rest of the committee would be.
Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Ring, you were next. Yes, you haven't had your other question answered, have you? Would you just like to repeat it, please?
Yes, that the 52.5% recycling target is no improvement on the current year, and I just wonder why.
Apologies, I misunderstood your question, because we didn't achieve the target this year, so that's why it stayed as it is. So because we haven't achieved it, we can't increase it, because so that would be a stretch too far for the service.
Could you say what we did achieve then?
Apologies, I don't know off the top of my head what the figure was. And it's just literally will have just come in. So we are under the year to date. But there will be a quarterly performance report coming shortly.
I think that's something that this committee would like to know when it's available, and that I come to Councillor Ring next in any case. Councillor Ring, I'm sure you may have something to say.
Oh, sorry, I've always got something to say about rubbish. Detritus is what it is, and we have a recommendation from government exactly how much that must be. And we can sit here all night saying, like, there's a crisp packet on a corner. And I don't play that game. I think it's a very good job done by the team at the depot. Very, very good. I wouldn't have had half of these KPIs, and I think the girls know that, because I think there's enough staff that need to be doing a job without collecting data that don't quite mean anything. But just cut the story short, in June, I think very early June or end of May, they will be doing a workshop, and they will be trying to answer every question that you can think of. So I suggest anybody that's sticking around should go to that workshop, and then it'll be better questions when it comes to this sort of thing, because I just think it's just too much. They're doing the job, they're doing it well. I don't need to see a photo, but if that's what you want, fine.
Before I call Councillor Harvey back, I believe you found the figure that Councillor McLaughlin was on.
So we always lag slightly behind in terms of getting the data from KCC, but the year-to-date figure we've got from KCC, so there's probably be a couple of months' information we're still waiting for, is at 50.34% at the moment for recycling.
Did you want to comment on that, or can I go straight to Councillor Harvey? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. Just one last quick question. Given that this is the final decision that this committee is the final decision, and there are various changes that you've already suggested at the start of things that are on this report that you've already made, how can we see a copy of that report afterwards? Will you resend it round, or do we have to request it?
I'm happy to circulate, what I'll probably do actually is circulate to you all the indicators so you can see which each committee is looking at. It's probably quite useful. So I'm happy to do that, and we can also send you the methodology as well if you're interested, because that's usually quite useful to see how we can. We don't have to, it's probably too much detail for some people. As a bit of a geek on it, I'm quite interested, but others might not be. But yeah, I can definitely send you a list so you've got it all in one place, and obviously at the quarter you'll see all the indicators each quarter.
Councillor Cox.
Would I be right in saying that we should see an improvement in this household waste because of the new things that we're doing with the Captain Caddy and the back of the bus, which I've seen? So those all seem brilliant things, but I do think it's possibly not the right way to point. But I think house of multiple occupancy, as I've said before, are the ones where the education is really needed. I live right next door to one, and it's the problem, splitting the waste, and I think that's the education. And I know the department does a fantastic job at fetes and fairs and stuff like that, but we are obviously putting the right money in the right place to encourage the recycling, and I'm sure we'll have good rewards for that. Thank you.
Nobody else has indicated to vote. I've got one. Yes, please come in.
Yeah, sorry to prolong this, but the fly tipping enforcement action, 20%, seems a bit low to me. I'd imagine that there are fly tipping hotspots around the borough where we know that there's a lot of fly tipping. Is it possible to put CCTV in so that we can actually catch these people and identify them?
Do you want to come back on this?
Yeah, the 20% figure has been given by the head of service, and we actually thought it was quite stretching, because it's actually quite difficult to get a prosecution, even with evidence. What we can do is, as the year goes on, we can keep this under review, and obviously we'll have another, I mean, this is the target for this year, and it's a baseline. We haven't been collecting data on this before. So as the year progresses, we can see if that's realistic or not, and if it's not challenging, we can put a tougher indicator next year, but the head of service believes that's the correct level.
Thank you. Members, there was one question asked which was under Home for Everyone, whether this committee wanted to include the processing of it was minor planning application. Was the other one the major? Minor and other, wasn't it? Because major is ours, yes. So minor and other planning applications. Can I ask if people, let's be careful how I put this, those who do not think we require them in our KPIs, would you please indicate? 3, 4. Okay, hang on. I want to make it clear that they will be in the KPIs for the relevant committee. So shall I just ask again? Those... No. They're not going to be in ours, but they will be in the relevant service committee. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 14. So that's 14. Those against? 1. Thank you very much. So members, with the questions that have been asked and what Mrs Woodhouse, Mrs Collier has said regarding the changes that need to be made, can you agree the recommendation which you'll find on page 16, which is to agree the key performance indicators in 2017-18 as set out at 3.3 in this report, covering the 3 action areas prioritised in the refreshed strategic plan. Can I have a show of hands for those in agreement, please? Oh, sorry, yes, I need a seconder. Yes, Councillor Cox. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 1 not. Oh, are you voting? Do you agree the key performance indicators that we have discussed? Please, could I have a show of hands? And that, no, yes, that is unanimous. Thank you very much. Does anybody need a comfort break before we move on to the next item? Everybody happy to push on? Okay. So we come to agenda item 14. I want to ask if anybody's been lobbied on this, please. Has anybody been lobbied on this? 2. Councillor Harwood and myself. That is the report of the Head of Regeneration and Economic Development, Phase 3. I've been, and yes, so that's okay. Mrs Wallace, I think we're in for a film show, ladies and gentlemen, so...
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So this report and the associated appendix relate to Phase 3 of the Public Realm project, which, when approved by this committee in April of last year, covered the north end of Week Street and Gabriel's Hill. However, as you will see from the recommendations in this report, there is now an option to include the southern section of Week Street, meaning the project would run from Maidstone East Station to Gala Bingo. Clearly, however, by increasing the scope of the project, there is an increase to the cost. When officers were looking at roads in need of improvement in the town centre, they looked at the north end of Week Street, Earl Street and Gabriel's Hill. These roads are considered to be secondary frontage, which generally have lower footfall and are in need of improvement. An audit was carried out to prioritise which roads would benefit from funding, and the north end of Week Street and Gabriel's Hill were found to be in most need. The southern section of Week Street was not considered, as this is primary shopping frontage with high footfall and low vacancy rates. However, as designs progressed for the north end and Gabriel's Hill, the question of improving the middle section was frequently raised. When looking at a plan of the proposals, there is a certain common sense to including the southern section to ensure there is coherence in the town centre. In addition, if the entire stretch was done in one go, there would be cost savings in the construction due to economies of scale. PRP and Conisbee are the appointed design team, and they have used the Public Realm Design Guide, which was approved by Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee, to steer their proposals. They have drawn on the history and heritage of Maidstone to create a better sense of place, and in particular at Maidstone East to create a sense of welcome and arrival from the station. And the designers have also been working with Network Rail on the designs for the station to ensure that the two work together. They've also created a number of squares along the length, using the wider locations to encourage people to stop, as well as allowing easier navigation, for example, to the museum or the Union Street shops. An officer group has been working with the design team and sketch proposals were presented to the chairs and vice chairs of HCL, CHE and P&R committees back in January. Since then, the design team has continued to refine the designs and a cost consultant has been costing up the work. Throughout the process, the design team have been conscious to keep capital costs down, but also ongoing maintenance costs, by using off-the-shelf materials as much as possible. In addition, the maintenance and cleansing regime for the paving is being checked and trial samples are due to be laid for testing. I do have samples of the paving here as well if members wish to see them. As outlined in the report, the current programme shows that this report has been presented to CHE Committee, HCL Committee, and since those meetings there have been slight tweaks to the recommendations, which Madam Chairman will clarify shortly. I'd just like to finish and show you a video showing the design intent for the north end of Week Street and Gabriel's Hill. Just to clarify, this video was produced before the middle section was considered. However, the design would continue along the same theme. The video was produced early on, so it just shows the design intent. It wouldn't go into any of the detail. For example, in the specific detail, there will be iguanodon footprints leading to the museum. This just shows the general theme and view. And hopefully the technology will work. And just to clarify, this is showing a shared surface, so there's no curb along this particular section of Week Street, which there is currently. And that's just showing a detail of a timeline that's proposed down the centre of the road, showing key historical dates for Maidstone. Yeah, that was just heading down to the museum. And this is the bottom of Gabriel's Hill, where Gala Bingo is. We're just proposing some detail at this particular point because that's where the River Len runs under the road. So we want to highlight that to people.
Thank you. Members, I'm not sure if we can get this up on the... Did we solve this problem? If you look at the recommendations under 4, it says to note that we are seeking additional funding of 900k. We wish to amend that slightly. So it says to note that we are currently seeking additional funding of 900k from external sources to cover the increased costs. With the 2 committees that this has previously been to asked to recommend to this committee that this sum was approved, but we believe that was somewhat premature. We ought to see what we can do to raise that money elsewhere first. And if you look at 6, it currently ends with the word for the construction of this project, and we wish to add with appropriate phasing of the works to ensure flexibility in the delivery phase. I'm recommending both of those amendments from the Chair. Councillor Blackmore.
I'm sorry, Madam Chairman. Where is the second one coming in? I don't quite understand that. I got the bit about the number 4. 6. Oh, number 6. Okay.
Have you got it? To give delegated authority to the Head of Regeneration and Economic Development to go out to tender for the construction of the project. That's where it originally ended. But to add with appropriate phasing of the works to ensure flexibility in the delivery phase. Councillor Blackmore, have you got it? Is that seconded? It is what you suggested and requested.
Oh, thank you. I don't know, I still feel some of these recommendations are in the wrong order, but I'll let that go because it's going to sound awfully petty. I think the principle of including the southern end of Week Street is actually sound, because otherwise we have a little bit there, then we have a gap, and then we have Gabriel's Hill. I would actually favour going with option 3 on page 44.
Councillor Blackmore, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I thought you were going to speak to the amendments, because I want to try and at least get those on the paper before we go to the general discussion. So I need somebody then, please, to second the amendments that I've just proposed from the Chair. Councillor Cox, thank you. So we'll put them up. I'm going to hold it at that point, but they are proposed and yes, on that particular point.
Yes, I'd quite like to speak. Oh, sorry. How confident are we of getting the funding from these external sources? Just a little bit more detail on that would be quite nice.
Mrs. Wallace.
Thank you. Yes, we have actually recently started those discussions when we realised that we would need the additional funding for the middle section. I know Alison has had discussions with Kent County Council and we're considering what, if any, Section 106 monies, for example, could be included as well. So we wanted to demonstrate that we have sought funding elsewhere before, if necessary, coming back to this committee if we're not able to fund the shortfall.
So what sorts of discussions then have been had with Kent County Council, and how willing are they to listen, and how many discussions have been had so far?
In terms of discussions with Kent County Council, I have had one conversation. That was with the Director of Highways and Transport. And given the maintenance savings for the county, I've suggested that they may want to consider making a contribution. When we had similar discussions in the context of Jubilee Square and Remembrance Square, a contribution of £600,000 was made by the County Council. I think it's fair to say, though, that that was in slightly different economic times. Nevertheless, the indication from officers is an openness to having that discussion. We have also in some of the feedback that we've had concerning our as yet unsuccessful bid for Heritage Lottery funding, one of the reasons for that was the need for us to increase private sector contributions, and we will therefore continue our discussions with businesses, including the owners of the mall. So those are the key areas for further consideration.
Have then, when we've been discussing in the conversation with Kent County Council and the other ones in private sector businesses, actually talked figures at any point? So you note that there was £600,000 towards Jubilee Square in better economic times from KCC. Well, now we're asking for £900,000 more money when they got less money to give out. That to me seems I'd be a little bit more pessimistic that money would be forthcoming. So that's why I'm pressing on this point, because I think it's very important to understand how much money the County Council in particular, but anyone else who's willing to contribute, would actually be prepared to give towards this £900,000 target that we're setting ourselves.
May I just say in response that I didn't suggest that one external source would provide all the money. So I think your mathematics, although accurate in terms of its application, is perhaps not as nuanced as our discussions have been. No doubt all of us will, are in a position, all the public sector is in a position of needing to prioritise very carefully what expenditure we can afford. And I think what the intent at the moment is to say that we should continue with the further development of this scheme and seek that funding. And if that doesn't become available, then we can consider our own resources again.
Do people wish to speak on this specifically? Is that what? Right, because Councillor Harwood indicated to speak first on this whole topic, but I'm prepared to try and bottom out this particular issue. But I have to say that it would be rather remiss of this council if we allocated our own money in such stretched times without even trying to do these things, and that's what this is all about, which is giving a very clear steer to officers to do their utmost to go through the external sources that we can try to see what, if anything, and hopefully something, we can raise. And that's the issue here. Now, I had Councillor Gooch and somewhere in front of me, could you indicate Councillor Garland? All right. On this money issue. Right, okay. Councillor Gooch first, please. I'll come back to you.
Thank you, Chairman. I was very interested to hear that the Heritage Lottery bid had failed, because that was actually one of the questions I wanted to ask. I was under the impression that I knew that we'd applied for the funding, but I didn't know that we'd actually failed. And I was under the impression that because there were very few applications from the South East, and that therefore our bid, with its huge potential, would at least be considered. And we had somebody who came down from the panel or something to come and have a look and encourage us to pay. So there's quite a lot of detail there. So I'm a bit disappointed that the information hasn't fed out, or perhaps I go around with my head in the sand. But I think this is pretty crucial, because having read this report, I'm thinking, yes, get the lot done, and I'm really feeling excited. And then I thought, well, hang on a minute, there's the financial side, and I'd be ever so nervous about committing £900,000, because I know we've got a contingency, but we've also got other huge pressures, and I'm really worried. Now, the Heritage Lottery Fund, are they saying to us, look, if you get a little bit more business private input, then they will consider us? Can we go back to them? Or is this a flat, no, you must be joking, don't even bother?
Well, firstly, just to apologise that you weren't aware that we had failed in the bid. So, yes, we found out in January that we'd been unsuccessful in this particular pot. In discussions with officers from the South East HLF partnership, they were very supportive of our project and were giving us lots of encouragement throughout. However, ultimately, although there weren't many submissions from the South East, ultimately all the projects nationally go into one national pot. The demand, the total pot of money that the Heritage Lottery had for this particular scheme was 18 million, and the demand on that pot was 40 million. So, inevitably, over half the projects who applied were actually unsuccessful. We did have a good one. However, feedback from the Heritage Lottery was, it was a good submission, but unfortunately other submissions were stronger. I think only 10 projects nationally were successful in this particular funding. It's worth pointing out or just clarifying that with the Heritage Lottery bid, the emphasis on public realm for the Townscape Heritage Fund is actually quite low. From Heritage Lottery's point of view, it was very much around shopfront improvements, education, community engagement, etc. The actual public realm element is not a big thing for them, and in fact that was one of their concerns in the feedback they gave to us when we found out we were unsuccessful, is we'd perhaps been a bit too heavy on the public realm element using HLF funding. It is a pot of money that gets refreshed, and the next round of funding is, I believe, the deadline is December of this year. So there is a possibility for us to reapply, but I just want to reiterate that in terms of the public realm, actually the Heritage Lottery funding wouldn't be able to pay for much of it. It's more, as I say, around shop fronts, education, etc.
Councillor Garland, you were next.
Yeah, very briefly. Yeah, these all make sense to me. But in the phasing amendment that you've made, if that £900,000 isn't forthcoming and the council isn't prepared to plug that particular gap, to me it would make sense to do all of Week Street and leave Gabriel's Hill. When you're talking about the phasing here, are you referring to that ability to rephase, so you do all of Week Street to avoid that gap that Councillor Blackmore mentioned earlier? Or is it a case, if you don't find the 900,000, the southern part of Week Street wouldn't be delivered full stop?
I think, Councillor Garland, the answer, and our officers can correct me if they choose, is that it will come to the committee to make those decisions at the appropriate time. Mr Cornwall, do you want to say something?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. I think that's fair to say that there's still a long way to go on these projects in terms of developing the detailed design, and detailed costing advice is going to follow behind that. So I think there's going to be every opportunity to sort of bottom out the best scenarios, but should the money not be available and the costs stay as they were originally suggested, my view is that we would revert to what was Plan A and do the top end of Week Street and Gabriel's Hill, because that's where the committee considered all the information in the past and felt that the best economic uplift would be achieved by doing those two areas.
I would disagree with that point of view, but that's fine. I'm not going to debate that one now. I think if you're going to do one part, you do it all one street, or you do all of Gabriel's Hill, not a bit here and a bit there, because it would just look to me a bit aesthetically odd. However, I'm not going to debate that point, but however, if we're reassured it's going to come back, so that phasing can be debated by councillors at some future date, if that £900,000 isn't forthcoming, then I'm reassured by what you say. In that sense. So can I have that assurance that that phasing strategy would actually come back?
Mr Cornwall, I think we can give that, can't we? Categorically, yes. Thank you, Councillor Garland. Councillor Pickett.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think we've done number 4. Can I mention number 6?
If it's to do with the amendment, yes.
Yes, please. No, the word flexibility worries me, because in my book, flexibility means delay. Can we have a comment on that? Because obviously we don't want to delay these schemes as much as we can.
I think just to clarify as well with regards to the phasing and flexibility of the scheme, in particular the delivery phase, as members may be aware, there are talks with Capital and Regional regarding the redevelopment of the mall on Gabriel's Hill in particular. So the reason that the flexibility wording was added in was if, for example, in a year's time, Capital and Regional tell us their intentions and their timetable, it might be prudent that we hold back slightly on Gabriel's Hill to ensure that we don't put down a nice new scheme and then Capital Regional come along and do their work. So just to clarify, the flexibility was around work that we know will be coming, but we don't know when it will be coming.
Thank you. I was fully aware of that. I just wanted to make sure that that word flexibility was what it says and not any hidden agenda. Sorry. Yeah.
Councillor Blackmore, on these amendments.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's actually about number 4. Just to go back to the additional funding, I've heard talk about business improvement districts, etc. I know it's been looked at in Maidstone before and it didn't fly. I don't know whether it's something that could be looked at again, because if the funds aren't forthcoming from, I don't know, KCC or Capital and Regional or whoever else is out there, what about a business improvement district? Is that realistic to try to raise some funds or work out if other businesses are interested in the project?
One Maidstone is already preparing a bid to do that, but we have to remember that it is not in the gift of the council to tell them how money should be spent. If that actually happens, then the business community decides how those additional resources are spent. Hopefully we will work well together on that, but a bid is made by the business community for the business community.
I understand that, Madam Chairman. No one's telling them what to do, but surely if they are aware of what our plans are, they may wish to support them and may appreciate that there would be uplift to everybody within the town. So I don't think it's a question of telling, it's just advising them of what we're doing. Because quite often I think we're accused of keeping everything to our chests and no one else out there knows. Little bit like the lottery bid, which results were announced in January, but it's all gone quiet. And I think just sharing that information with businesses generally may help. You might even find there'll be businesses out of town who might want to support it. Who knows? I'm always hopeful.
Councillor Blackmore, the businesses are well aware of this. They know that what's happening. And it is for one Maidstone. We are assisting them in certain ways with the bid, but it is for one Maidstone to actually frame the bid in the way that they believe will be most acceptable to the businesses in this town. Do you wish to come back, Mrs.
And just to add to that, regarding the timing of the projects, as Madam Chairman just mentioned there, One Maidstone are currently working on a bid, developing up the actual bid process, but that actually takes a year, so they're not looking to take a vote on actually becoming a bid until May of next year or May, June of next year. So the timing of that wouldn't work from our point of view. As we are working closely with One Maidstone, they're fully aware of this, but I don't think the timing would work.
Yes, and just to say, in terms of the funding, there are sort of infrastructure type funding packages that are available to bid for, you know, which we would obviously require the support from KCC, but those are sort of allocated through the local enterprise partnership. So that's an opportunity that we'll be pursuing as well for funding.
Councillor Ring, if you would like to come in now. We cannot keep going round and round in circles on this particular item. Councillor Ring, you were next, and I have got you.
Okay. Thank you very much. And you can put me right about this question that I'm going to ask. And I'm sorry to be the practical person, but that's me. So there's this beautiful new paving, and beautiful new benches and trees, etc., etc. My greatest concern is where the constituency money for ongoing maintenance. We all know that happens in the town, as pleased as we are, and also the cleansing. It is something that's going to cost. You can't. I'd hate to see where some of the things in Jubilee Square, because they wasn't treated properly in the first place, have gone downhill a little bit. And there's no matter how much cleansing we do, you can't change it. So all I'm saying is that is a beautiful picture, and any human being would say, God, that would be absolutely fantastic. But not if you're not going to clean it with the right amount of staff, right amount of machinery, because them pretty things take longer and more detail to keep clean. That's all I'm going to say.
Councillor Ring, maybe we can pick up on that in a minute. Councillor Borton, is your question related to these amendments?
Absolutely, and it's related to number 4. And what I've learned in the discussion is that the heritage lottery money is now no longer, despite us thinking it was the case. And I think there's a separate question about why we didn't know, why the deputy leader of the council didn't know about that 3 months on. Okay, anyway, that's a separate point. So we've learned the business improvement districts is another potential avenue for funding, but they're not going to make a decision until May or June next year. And I'm still not sure whether we've actually asked them the question as to whether they'd be able to contribute or not. We've learned that the LEP is a potential source of funding, so I'd quite like to know what discussions have been had with the LEP so far. We've also learned that we've had one conversation between the Chief Executive at KCC, but there was no figures put on it. So that makes it very difficult for me to support recommendation number 4, to note that we are currently seeking additional funding of 900,000, because it seems a bit premature and a little bit vague so far, to be honest. But I'd quite like, if Mr Cornwall can come back on the LEP point specifically, that would be appreciated.
Thank you for the question. And just to put it in context, really, the reason for introducing this additional work was really to make sure it wasn't going to be a missed opportunity, and if monies were ultimately available, that we should, do as cohesive a scheme and not miss out sections. So that was the logic, and so obviously we're sort of trying to get to that point first of all, and pursuing the different lines of funding. Secondly, to bring that to fruition. So that was really how we approached things. But to say there is another fund out that's going to be allocated by the LEP, and the submission date is in the summer. I haven't got the exact date, but it's for sort of highways and infrastructure type improvements, and that's what we'll be sort of discussing with KCC in more detail as we go. But I can actually, send you a link to the prospectus tomorrow if that would help.
That would be helpful, but bearing in mind that these LEP bids can take a long time to prepare, and the next round of submissions is, I think it's in September, but I might be wrong. Anyway, we are leaving it quite fine, I think, considering the discussion or lack of discussions that we've been having so far. But yeah, if you could send me the link and we can perhaps have this conversation outside the meeting.
Members, I think we've gone round this for a very long time, and we need to talk about the substance of the report as much as this. So I'm going to actually ask for a show of hands for those in agreement. Councillor Blackmore, have you anything really of value to add on this specifically?
Well, I have actually, Madam Chairman. I just wanted to say that subject to the phasing, I'd be happy to move all the recommendations, but you wouldn't let me do it.
I can't actually take all the recommendations, Councillor Blackmore, because we need to actually agree the amendments first. So I've proposed them. Councillor Cox has seconded them. So I'm asking you, first of all, for a show of hands on 4. You've got. Can you see the wording, or do I need to read it out yet again? No? Okay. So do you agree the amendment to the recommendation 4 that are on your papers? Could I have those in agreement, please? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, I think. Those against? 1, 2. Abstentions? 1. Thank you. And then we go to 6. And again, do I need to read it out, or are you happy that you... Thank you. Can I have a show of hands for those to approve? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 13. No. Against? Oh, so we've got 14. Against? Abstentions? 1. Thank you. Right, Councillor Harwood, I take on board what you've said. Those two will now become, I will have to vote that they're part of the substantive, but they can be taken with the rest of it if we get fairly speedily there. Councillor Harwood has been waiting exceptionally patiently because he actually indicated before anybody else to speak. So, Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. As you know, I've been quite outspoken in my criticism of this scheme because I do think it's rather kind of bleak Newtown chic, actually, in its approach. We are, after all, the county town of the Garden of England, and I think that's one of the reasons why the Heritage Lottery Fund bid foundered, because I think we have amnesia over our history, we have amnesia over our cultural significance, and we have an amnesia about what makes Kent special. I'm very glad to see that they've proposed to change the tree species, because I was quite struck by the kind of Pickwick papers. Everybody knows Kent apples, cherries, hops, and women, and everyone knows Kent Chinese ginkgo and Himalayan birch. But anyway, just to get on to the serious point, I think the principle is a good one. I think it's the issue around we cannot give any blank cheques, quite big blank cheques from the discussion we've been having. And I think actually through Section 106 and other routes, I think there is the potential to draw in funding. But this has to be a sustainable scheme. We've seen the confusion that we had over the Riverside recently, where we need to look at regularising our service ducting if we are to ever get a high street that we can actually do anything with, a weak street we can do anything with, a Gabriel's Hill we can never do anything with. Likewise, in terms of tree pits, if they're going to be sustainable, we need to use cutting-edge technology, and it's out there and it exists, but we need to ensure it's designed in. I am not aware of the detail yet in terms of taking that forward. In terms of the issues around building in the timeline, as mentioned, we have real amnesia about our history. Things that went on in Maidstone Town Centre lost a queen and a king their heads. There's no other county town, town centre that could say that. But, from Thomas White the Younger's ill-fated revolt that didn't do Jane Grey any good, through to the Battle of Maidstone and the wider Kentish revolt, which didn't do Charles I any good. But we really got to ensure that we've got some surety on what's going in there. So what I need to understand is where is the member engagement in terms of ensuring that the detail in the timeline, where the ragstone is going to go, where what the precise tree species are, where they're going to go, where the green wall's going to go, and how we actually deliver that. I think once we have that detail, I'm prepared to go along and support it, but I don't have that surety at the moment. The other point where I think Maidstone underplays itself is in terms of its cultural history and background. I just don't want the dates of battles on there. I mean, are we going to link into Christopher Smart and Edmund Blunden and Edward Thomas and Tennyson and all of the other issues where Maidstone is central to a lot of their work. So it would have been nice if there was a project group of members that were feeding into this from the off, so that we could actually kind of couch and frame the proposal as it goes forward. But seeing as it's a bit after the stable door, shutting the stable door after the horse has bolted, I want to know how we can retrofit that member engagement and involvement now. Thank you.
Councillor Harwood, if you look at the recommendation 9, it says about giving delegated authority to the head of regeneration and economic development in consultation with the chairs and vice chairs of Heritage, Culture and Leisure, Communities, Housing and Environment Committee and Policy and Resources. Are you not satisfied that that would cover what you're concerned about? And if that's the case, is there an amendment you would wish to make?
I suggest that there should be a member task and finish group. I mean, for example, you know the issues we've had over the East Station. You know, it's in my ward. I've seen nothing. I mean, I've asked and asked and asked to look at the way that designs move on. I heard nothing at all. I don't know if any of the other ward councillors who actually cover it's in our patch. The top of Week Street is in Martin and my wards, but you know, I've never been asked. I've never heard anything. So how we do it, whether it is ward member group, which I think, you know, if this were occurring in Marden and Yalding, I suggest that the local members and the parish group wants to be involved. I think likewise, it's in our ward, it's in our patch. We need to be engaged and involved, and I suggest that having a sounding board or a group where drawings and proposals are almost like a pre-app discussions, where the local ward councillors and so on are invited to pre-apps. I think we should have that sort of a model transposed onto this infrastructure project.
So you're suggesting, but will you move something specific?
I move it, but I think it, yeah.
Yes, but what precisely?
I move that a group comprising the ward members, as well, you know, and then you can bring in the chairs and vice chairs, but also the affected ward councillors, which is High Street, North Ward and East Ward, are involved in discussions and groups. And this is only finalising them. They'll still go to committee, they'll still be signed off, but I think we need to inform them early on.
Is that seconded? Councillor Cox. Councillor Borton, you wanted to come in.
Yes, now prior to Councillor Harwood's speech, I was going to talk about recommendation 9 and the problems I had with this anyway, but it doesn't necessarily mean I agree with the solution that's on the table, because Councillor Harwood made the distinction between what was happening in Marsden and Yalding. Well, the difference is that, with great respect to the people of Marsden and Yalding, it's not the centre of the borough, it's not the town centre. This is the town centre where everyone looks to, we all use it, we're here at the moment. So I don't think, as much as I trust the ward members at North and East and High Streets, this is actually an issue that affects us all, whether you represent Fant or Shetway or Marsden and Yalding or anywhere, to be honest. So I think leaving it just to the ward members for those 3 wards isn't really good enough. I personally like to see this come back to a committee. Probably HEL is the best place to agree the nitty-gritty of the design to make sure it's formalised as well, because we are talking about an incredibly important project here. I've already explained the issues I have with the funding, but Councillor Harwood is right. The design is terribly important, and when we as a collective group of councillors need to have our views fed into it as possible. So I couldn't support Councillor Harwood's recommendation as is on the table, and of course before that was I was going to propose bringing it back to HTL instead for number 9, but I appreciate that amendment is on the table first.
Councillor Round, you were next.
To some extent, my point does relate to all of this activity. To some extent, I have a great deal of sympathy for Councillor Harwood's view. Had we not been at Policy and Resources and had some sort of plan being presented to Planning Committee, I think those of us on Planning Committee would have been mortally offended by point 2. Because, quite frankly, it's a Planning Committee decision for us to go through a design and look at things. It's fine for other people to contribute to it, and it's fine for other people to have their ideas. But a Planning Committee and the planning process ultimately decides some of these things. And had it come to a Planning Committee, I'm sure we would have taken up Councillor Harwood's suggestion where we would have formed a group to consult and look at those potential issues. So, in many respects, it's a question, but it's also a support for Councillor Harwood.
Thank you. I've lost it. Councillor Round? I haven't had anybody else actually, or if I've missed you. Sorry, Councillor Pickett.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think Fran Wallace will back me up on this. We've actually had 2 workshops on this particular item, and I know some of the members here tonight were there on 2 occasions at least. So it has been looked at from councillor level, and I know the invitation went out to all councillors if they wanted to attend. So the preliminaries were done. So I can't accept that councillors were not aware.
Councillor Borton, and then I'm just
Not quite what's happened then. I wasn't talking about what's happened in the past. I was talking about what happens going forward from here in the future. And that's why I was very keen to formalise it as much as possible. And my personal suggestion would be to get it back to HDL committee to discuss going forward. Where we are, I accept where we are at the moment. So I accept the fact there's been workshops. I'm not disagreeing with you on that point. I'm saying how we go through when we frankly get to the nitty-gritty stage of the process, as we will.
Sorry, Councillor Blackmore.
I'm going to say something really controversial. I think we're getting bogged down in some nitty-gritty that we actually don't need to deal with at this point in time. I think what we're actually looking at is, do we agree with the principle of the scope being extended? If the answer to that question is yes, then the rest of it automatically follows, and who gets delegated what is slightly academic at this point in time, because I just think we're so early in the project, providing we actually agree to the scope and then the subsequent phasing. In my opinion, that's all you really need at this point in time. And I just think we're getting a little bit too involved. So if you don't mind, Madam Chairman, I'd almost like to sweep the recommendations we've got aside and say, can we just accept the scope, accept the phasing, we're looking at additional funding, and then bring it back to us when we've got some progress?
It's very complicated because it cuts across so many committees. If I've heard correctly, what is actually being said is that it's we need to go through all the recommendations, but it seems that the committee is saying that it is premature to go with 9, which is to give delegated authority, because it's too soon. Yes, is that what the committee is saying? Yeah, I'm just looking right the way round. So I would suggest then that there is a need to find a way of involving the ward councillors. It is always difficult with the town centre because it's a strategic area, and that has to be recognised, but it is also part of the ward, and that has to be recognised too, because we actually have residents living in it. So I'm going to take some advice, but I suggest that perhaps we go down the list of recommendations one by one in this case, Councillor Blackmore, just so we're absolutely certain. And then we will ask the officers to think about how we can actually get a rational way forward.
Well, the first thing you have to do is...
Well, I've got to take the amendments.
Yes.
Yes.
So maybe we can do that first.
Yes. So, yes, I was getting there. So, members, we have under 4, we have an amendment. No, we voted on that. Sorry.
Amendment to 9.
Yes. Sorry. Wonderful.
It's okay.
So, are we agreed, members, that we're removing it, actually, I think. What we are saying is that tonight we remove the...
What he proposed. I'm sorry, that's not the amendment that
Councillor Harwood... Yes, all right. Councillor Harwood proposed that there was a task and finish group and it should comprise the ward members. With any... Sorry? Yes, that was High Street, East and North. Was that seconded by Councillor Cox? Can I have a show of hands for those in favour of setting that up?
Sorry, can I ask for clarification before you do? And the reason I'm asking for it is that you're amending item 9, and item 9 has actually quite a lot of information in it. Are you actually suggesting a replacement of recommendation 9?
Councillor Harwood? Or are you suggesting an addition to?
Yeah.
So I believe that what is not being suggested is that those three wards make the final decision, but it's that they actually have the ability to have full input because it covers their ward. Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, essentially 9 talks about giving delegated authority in consultation with the chairs and vice chairs of Heritage, Culture and Leisure. I was going to insert another stage where, ahead of the delegated authority being given, there would be a sounding board, a task and finish group comprising the local ward members who would make their comments upon and discuss the detail of the scheme before the head of Regeneration and Economic Development then signs it off, if you like, with those chairs. So essentially it's just giving an opportunity for the local knowledge issues to be fed into the mix, because otherwise it's not in there anyway and there will be no opportunity.
Councillor McLaughlin, now hang on a minute, I have picked you up, but I'm going to ask the Chief Exec to...
Can I check that this is what you mean? So 9 would become to give delegated authority to the head of Regeneration and Economic Development in prior consultation with the ward councillors from High Street, North and East wards, and subsequently with the chairs and vice chairs, and then read it to the end. That is your intention.
Thank you, Chair. I'm all in favour of the ward members getting involved, as could any other member get involved. When this matter comes to the Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee, there will be a full and frank discussion that all members who are interested can contribute to. I think the way this discussion is going, I don't see, as was mentioned earlier, we need to even consider any of these delegation of authorities. So 6, 7, 8 and 9 fall away, so there's no point trying to amend 9. But we'll do that at a later stage when the situation and the phasing comes back here and everything is clearer.
This is getting very complicated. I'm going to ask, first of all, I will ask Councillor Round was indicating, and then I'll come back.
My proposal follows that as well. You don't need 2.
We can't just. We might as well not be here if we're going to sweep the whole lot off the board, and that actually means that nobody and the officers will not be able to move forward on anything. So let's not get too gung-ho and carried away on that. So I think I'm going to just wait a minute. So let's have a look at this. So the first one is important because it's to approve the change in scope. I know I can't take it, but you've just got to realise what's on here. To approve the change in scope, you can't just, that's there. If you sweep everything else away, you're actually putting a stop on officers being able to progress. So we have to bottom out the issue of Councillor Harwood's amendment. Chief Exec, would you like to say what you've just said?
May I just suggest that procedurally, given that an amendment has been moved and seconded, before you then start to eliminate or add other recommendations, you need to dispose of the amendment. You may ultimately decide you don't want to make that amendment, and even if you make it, you might not agree the substantive afterwards. So can I just suggest that in order for us to stay administratively sound, you consider the amendment to recommendation 9, and then you come back and look at everything else. The only caveat I would put to that is, having heard the things that are going on in the room, whether the proposer and the seconder want to continue with the amendment to recommendation 9. If that's the case, then vote on it and then we can move to any other change.
Yes, I do want to go, because the principle of putting the local knowledge and so on to ensure they're in the design is really important. It's just a way of getting it on the table, on the agenda.
I'm going to move to the vote then, and that is to... Can we have that read out? Who's got it, please? Chief Exec.
So, recommendation 9 would become to give delegated authority to the Head of Regeneration and Economic Development in prior consultation with ward councillors for High Street North and East wards, and subsequently with the chairs and vice chairs of the Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee, Communities, Housing and Environment Committee and Policy and Resources Committee to approve the final detailed designs.
So we move to the...
Sorry, Madam Chairman, I'll just make a comment on this. Obviously, I've abstained, but I agree with the format on this. But I just wanted to reiterate that Heritage, Culture and Leisure is working on this more or less daily, and obviously we would consult with councillors going along the way. So, to put us on the end, as Chair, Vice Chair, I'm just saying that the whole work process is continuing all the time, so no one's excluded, no one is left out. So.
Councillor Cox.
Oh, sorry.
Let's be very clear then about this. We're going to talk about the other amendments, but this, what has just been voted on, becomes part of the substantive part of the voting. Sorry, I'll get my tongue round this in a minute. We've got to vote on it as substantive. It can be part of the rest of it. I'm sorry, I'm choking my head off at the moment. So, Councillor Garland.
I think you're absolutely right, Chairman, where there were suggestions that certain items, particularly delegations, should be removed. I think if those delegations are removed, then there is a danger that this project will be delayed and won't actually take place. So I disagree that anything should be taken off. Item 2, I'm assuming that's now going. I'm quite happy with item 2. I'm quite happy with the outline designs. And as Councillor Round said earlier, we need to be in a position where planning application can go to committee, and that will be debated by a committee, following all the other points that have been followed, particularly 9. So I would move all of the recommendations on the paper, and let's get this done, because I think there is a danger that the committee, it will be death by committee, and we want to avoid that. So I think all the delegations that you rightly said should remain, should remain.
Members, do you want me to take it one by one, or can I take the whole lot as one? One? Can I have a show of hands on that? Because I need to know if you are agreeing that I won't do something that the majority of the committee don't agree to. Take it all together? Who wants to take it all together? Councillor Garland. Right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Is that? Yes, 11. Against? 4, and that means there are no abstentions. Therefore, members, I will not read it all out. You know what the amendments are that have now become part of the main voting. So can I have a show of hands, please, on those who approve the Sorry?
Has it been seconded?
Who's actually seconded it? Councillor Gooch has... Yes, Councillor Gooch did. So, can we please move to the vote that we're voting on 1 to 9 with the amendments? Those in favour, please indicate. No, that means there are no abstentions. Yeah, there's no. Yes, and an abstention. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. We've got it. Yes. Can you repeat what we've got, please, Mr. Bailey? I'm sorry, we need to do the vote again. Those in favour, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11. Those against? 1, 2, 3. And abstentions? 1. Thank you. Councillor Blackmore, yes.
Madam Chairman, I'd actually like my dissent noted because there are items of this which I would agree with, but I don't agree with all of it. So I think it's a shame we've actually taken them all together, because I think had we have taken them individually, you may have found that certain aspects were unanimous, which I think is a shame.
Your dissent is noted for both. Yes, I've got it for both of you. I'm going to ask again, do you want to plough on regardless, or do you want 10 minutes? Yes? Okay to plough on, everybody? All right.
Sorry, Madam Chairman, I just need to leave the room for 10 minutes.
All right. You sure you don't want me to call a halt for 10 minutes? We now move to page 97 to 109, the Audit Partnership Risk Management Update. Mr Heppelston, you've been extremely patient. Would you like to introduce this?
Good evening, and thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Over the course of the last 18 months, this committee has been fairly engaged as we've moved through the advancement and improvement of the Council's risk management arrangements, including approving the Council's risk management framework, and also making a recommendation that we come back to the committee every 6 months with an update on how we're doing with risk and also any advancements in the process. What this report does is provide an update specifically on the Council's 10 corporate level risks. In October, when I presented an update to you, we had at that stage identified the risks through a member workshop and with CLT and heads of service, and the next stage was to start assessing those and identifying the key controls, which is what has happened now. So this is what this update report is about. The Council's comprehensive risk register includes risks at an operational level and at a corporate level. And so while this certainly isn't all the risks that the Council's facing, these are those top 10 risks that were identified that speak directly to the achievement of the Council's corporate plan and strategic objectives. Therefore, it's a way of identifying those key issues that are distilled into the kind of the broader aspects around the key risks. By their very nature, they are inherently risky, as you would expect, because they're key issues. But you'll note, by way of the scoring, that they have varying degrees of impact and likelihood, which shows how they're being managed across the broad spectrum of the risk areas. It is important to notice that when we're talking about risks, we are talking about uncertainty, and therefore there is a level of judgment and subjectivity which is managed through the framework, through the impact and likelihood scales and definitions. But because this is risk and we are talking about uncertainty, we're talking about events that may not happen or they may already be in train, but they're things that the Council is aware of and are keeping on their agenda. So they're not describing events that will absolutely happen. It's about uncertainty and ensuring that as a Council we are aware of them, that we're fully informed and able to make decisions around how we manage the risk if it was to become a reality. The overall profile of the Council's corporate level risks is detailed on page 101. The key change being that you can see the inherent scores of the risk there versus the residual risk scores. Now, when we talk about residual risks, what we are talking about is the application of controls, which I've detailed on page 106. I couldn't get them all onto one table, sorry about that. But what that shows is, well, this is the action that the Council is taking or is planning to take, which will help to manage the risk down to an acceptable level. So that kind of closes the loop in the risk management process. Now, I'm aware that risk management, in order to be valuable, needs to be a continuous process, which is why we come back to this committee and provide an update. But specifically, the risk that the council faces changes all the time. And like I said, these aren't the only risks that the council is facing. And so what I'm proposing as part of the next steps as we move into 17-18 will be an opportunity again to look at our risks fresh and to do an exercise to identify emerging risks that are coming on the horizon. So that will be the forward-looking exercise, which will see the refresh of these risks, and then they will continue to come to this committee every 6 months by way of update. So that's really the work we've been doing over the last few months to update these risks. It's here to note, it's hopefully helpful information to show that the council is aware of its risks and is taking appropriate action to manage those risks. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm fairly surprised by some of these, I've got to say. I think I'm most surprised by COR 7, overcautious administration. As a result of having election by thirds, the council is unable to maintain momentum without taking and implementing key decisions. I mean, I just frankly don't understand what that means. I can see issues where you get whole council change and you get disruptive change, but what has having elections by thirds got to do with momentum and implementing key decisions? You know, they still need to be taken. I'm surprised that there is nothing about the environmental impacts of poor air quality and so on becoming, you know, and traffic congestion and so on, which really can cause problems for the operation of the borough and our business confidence. But yeah, as I say, I'm just a little bit surprised at some of the omissions and surprised at some of the inclusions, but I'll say nothing more.
Mr Heatherstone, do you wish to comment on that? Or do you note it because we are asked to make comments?
I think the only thing that I would add is that these risks were identified by a blend of elected members and senior officers in the organisation. And it's always open to us to add or take away if we think that the risk doesn't exist or something should be added. So I think... Thank
you for that, Chief Executive. But, I mean, looking at the, you know, the inherent risks, like the cyber attack recently on Lincolnshire Council, which basically destroyed their files, you know, looking at, you know, disgruntled, you know, individuals because of planning decisions burning down South Oxfordshire District Council, I can see them as being key risks that people are going to do. I think putting in an overcautious administration because of election by thirds and not having things like the fact that we're overdue for an influenza pandemic and the fact that we've got, you know, there just seem to be so many really big risks that are in the UK risk register and within the Kent Resilience Forum, Kent Risk Register, which don't appear to be in here, but some quite left field ones are. I will perhaps write in with a critique, because I don't think we can do it justice in the debate here, but you know, it's interesting.
I think it would be useful if you do write with your concerns. I will say that what's happened to other councils, we should be wary, and hopefully that's well covered. I have nobody else in. Yes, Councillor Firma.
Sorry, it's it's probably a stupid question I should have asked before as well, but COR 8, Alison Brewman, who's WLT?
It's our wider leadership team. Apologies.
Has anybody else got anything they wish to say? Yes, Councillor Blackmore.
I'd like to move the recommendation, please.
Is that seconded? Councillor Gooch, you were next. Show of hands, please, then. Those in favour of the recommendation on page 97. 11. Those against? 1. And abstentions? 2. 2 abstentions. Thank you, members. Councillor Ring, do you wish to come back? She can vote. Councillor Ring, you can, strangely, unlike planning, you can vote if you've been out of the room and you've come back in. Do you wish me to take the vote again, or are you... So we record you as being absent for that part. Right. We come to part 2 items. I move that the public be excluded from the meeting for the items set out in part 2 of the agenda because of the likely disclosure of exempt information for the reason specified, having applied the public interest test. Members, I'm moving to, if we can clear the room first, please.